Hello, hello! Greetings to you, whatever time of day you're listening to this, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the trans?
What the trans?
Yes, indeed, it's us. We are back. How are you both doing?
I'm so happy to just see my dog again. Oh, apparently he's been a miserable old sod while I've been away, which is standard crack for him. Yeah, I know. But yeah, I've just been vibing at home, doing not that much because we've been doing a lot.
Yes, we sure have.
Yeah, I think me and Ashleigh now agree that for the well-being of your dog, you're now banned from going on assignments for What the Trans to keep
Oh
your
my
dog
God.
happy.
I'll just bring him with me. Y'all can meet him. It's fine.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, let's do that. It's all been good, so we've all been kind of off on our jollies over the last few weekends. More on that later, but it did involve all of us. Well, almost all of us, in terms of the people who present and whose voices you've heard, assembling in sunny Manchester last weekend. Wasn't that fun?
It was so fun. It was really
the trip
good.
was brilliant.
But we will do a bit more of a debrief after the actual segment. Has anyone been up to anything else?
A friend of mine, just after I got home, was like, do you want to go and see one of your favourite bands as an early Christmas present? And I went, well, does the Pope shit in the woods? Yes. So, one of my favourite bands I'm going to be seeing, Fat Freddy's Drop, they're sick. And because I'm going to be in that area at the time, I'm going to go to a counter-protest and prevent the fash from taking over Newcastle, because the bastards are out in force. So
yes,
we're going to have to be out in force too.
Oh,
Yep.
exactly. Or in the case of Wednesday, lack of being out there from what we saw.
That was pretty great, wasn't it? Yeah, so there was, as we record this a couple of days ago, there was supposed to be fascist meetings happening in many, many cities nationwide, and there kind of just wasn't.
I was expecting something, but I was just surprised at just how little there was.
Well, I think it's because they quickly realised that the success that they had previously was a fluke, and that with the slightest bit of warning, people will mobilise en masse and will just simply take up space and say refugees are welcome here, and say nationalism or shall we say fascism is not welcome here, and racism is not welcome here, and that's good. I saw so many places where it was just the whole community coming together, and either no one from the fash showed up, or like 3 or 4 did, and they got wonderfully cornered into this little corner where they just had to sit there and be ashamed.
Shame corner.
It is still like, as much as a lot of people are very understandably elated with the lack of turnout on the following fascist rallies that were attempted, we can't deny that it is still a incredibly scary and fearful time. Those fascists have not disappeared into the ether. They didn't despawn from this planet when we held up a sign saying fascists out. If only it was that simple. Those people are still out. There are still organisations that will be planning the next one, and I think that, especially if you're a white person that's turning up to counter protests, bear in mind that this is not about you, and what those fascists are attempting is something that would benefit you. So you have to ensure that you're doing your best to prevent them, but also that means listening to the people that are more affected. Because we talk a lot as trans people about making sure that people are listening to us about things that matter to us. And I think that when you can very obviously see the wrong that is happening, by white nationalists, it's really easy to know that you don't hold those views and then assume that that's kind of the work done, and you get to just turn up to a place, say, yay, we don't like fascists, we don't want racism, and then have a party and go home. And it's not that, right? You're still there to protect, primarily. You're there to
oppose,
and you're there to disrupt, because you're disrupting a system. We can't let it pretend that this fascism hasn't come out of nowhere and hasn't been stoked by the fires of, the political sphere for the last however long now. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox.
That sort of dominated the headlines for the past few days. And
I mean, if there's a group of people in your country who want to kind of fundamentally change your country to the extent that these people do, I think it should be in the news, really.
Yeah.
Although it must have been an interesting bit of cognitive dissonance with all of the people at publications like the Telegraph and the Mail who do kind of agree with what the protesters are going out for, but also they have to appear semi-neutral and then immediately resort to calling them thugs. It's like, well, I agree with you, but you're doing it wrong.
It's the calling them protesters. That's the thing that's really bothering me. They aren't protesting, to be honest. What they are doing is organising with the aim to terrorise people. That is not a protest. A protest is the aims of changing a system that is harmful. And I would argue that if you're protesting to create more harm, that's not a protest. That's a rally.
Unfortunately, it's that time again. The news. But we brought this on ourselves, really. We knew what we were getting into.
This is our fault, yeah. So I would say it starts off nicely, but unfortunately, to start with, we will need to give a content warning to mentions of suicide. So if you are affected by mentions of this, please skip past by a few minutes. So, when we reported on the CAS review, we ended the episode on the note that after LaBelle v. Tavistock ruling, there was a ruling that the use of puberty blockers were to be banned. But following that ban, 16 trans young people died by suicide, whilst a year prior to it, there was only one death by suicide. Now, following this being leaked by Susie Green and Joe Morn, there was a review into these claims by the NHS led by Professor Louis Appleby. Then claimed that Susie and Joe were wrong, and according to the report, its summaries of conclusions said this. Firstly, the data do not support the claim that there had been a large rise in suicide in young gender dysphoria patients at the Tavistock. The way that this issue has been discussed on social media has been insensitive, distressing, and dangerous, and goes against guidance on safe reporting of suicide. The claims that have been placed in the public domain do not meet basic standards for statistical evidence. There is a need to move away from the perception that puberty-blocking drugs are the main marker of non-judgmental acceptance in this area of healthcare. We need to ensure high-quality data in which everyone has confidence as the basis of improved safety for this at-risk group of young people. So following that, the report then also claimed that in the 3 years leading up to 2021, there were 5 suicides, compared to 7 in the 3 years after. This is essentially no difference, taking account of expected fluctuations in small numbers, and would not reach the statistical significance in the under 18s. Specifically, there were 3 suicides before and 3 after 2020 or 2021. However, following this report, there have been concerns with its methods of collecting and analysing the data, especially considering the word trans does not appear once in that report. Alongside this, according to Trans Safety Now, it doesn't seem to take into account the FOIs and information from board minutes and other sources of a number of other deaths of children and young people seen by or known to GIDS. With this too, it uses terms like patients at the Tavistock and current and recent patients of GIDS, and it's unclear on if this includes patients on the waiting lists. So, by the sounds of it, they looked at the people who had been seen by GIDS, but not those waiting. And there's like 10,000 people you haven't looked at there. There are other criticisms out there, but as seen, there's been accusations that this report is just a shoddily and hastily put together cover-up to hide the neglect that the NHS is responsible for.
So you say that the NHS is responsible for, but I think it's a number of political decisions that are really responsible for it. Like a Tory government that's refused to have anything to do with trans healthcare. Waiting lists have got longer and funding has not increased which I think is a large part of the problem. I think a lot of the people on the waiting list who committed suicide before they were even seen by GIDS, I think those people were failed by more than the NHS. I think those people were failed politically, essentially.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, agree.
And a death like this, when someone completes suicide, it is very rarely simply a factor of that individual's singular mental health. There are always going to be the other factors of where were they able to get help? What were they needing help with? And was there support there for that? Was there, and we're talking about the kind of structural support. It's very different being able to talk to, for example, a family member or a friend about, struggling with debt or having dysphoria and having no option to be able to get treatment. And yeah, the toss could be argued with statistical relevance or statistically significant this, that, or the other, but I don't like the methodology. I don't like the way that they have thinned out the data set to then extrapolate a smaller number. I'm sorry, but if you want me to see that it's not statistically significant, then I need to see you look over the larger data set as well and then explain to me why. You know what I mean? Like, talk us through that data then. If it's statistically significant when you include all of these other people who are trapped in the system of trying to get the healthcare, even if they haven't been seen yet, which, by the way, I'm one. So I would argue I'm not trans, not part of that community. But this really does seem to have, to complete the thought. So if it's statistically significant on that large scale, or it looks to be, but it isn't on this small scale, then you need to explain to me why you're picking one number over the other. And they haven't really done that here. Regardless of where these people were at in the point of their treatment or accessing treatment, every death is still a failure of the state. Personally, in my opinion, it is exactly a failure of this state, of its callousness and its disregard for the people that it has a responsibility for.
Because even if it is a case of, it's not as many people dying, there's still people dying.
Yeah. Like, why is 3 not still a big enough number for you to go, we need to figure this out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's still 3 people. That's 3 lives. That's 3 communities that will be grieving those people. So why is that less?
Like, as far as they're concerned, how many is too many? And the answer to that question is not something I'd actually like to know.
No.
But yeah. So it kind of seems like this is a political do-over, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
And the blatant lack of transparency is just blatantly outrageous.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem, isn't it? The fact that they've not been very open about how they've arrived at that number.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that I think in, however many years' time, there are going to be freedom of information requests, and it probably isn't going to look good for them when those information requests are done. But speaking of political changes,
yes.
Speaking of accessing equal treatment and the ways in which the government may not sometimes act in our best interest for it, I say the government, the institutions of our country.
Yes.
The Equal Treatment Bench Book has been updated, and the changes that have been made are concerning. But it's likely that a lot of you right now are asking, what is that and why is that important? So here is a brief rundown. The Equal Treatment Bench Book is a resource for those at the bar, so judges, magistrates and the like, to better understand how to treat people, yes, you guessed it, equally. The aim of it is to encourage better communication between the various kinds of people that end up in a courtroom and those in the court. It covers everything from legalese and jargon and social exclusion through to race, religion, disability, the various protected characteristics of the Equalities Act. While you may never have heard of it, this book is a key piece of literature that the judiciary looks at for how to treat us, in particular, how to treat marginalised people. So now the answer to the second question of why is this important is becoming worryingly clear, I'll presume. If the advice in this text is not good, then it can cause widespread harm. This document is something that can be amended, and it is publicly available, so you can look at it now. But be warned, it is over 350 pages, so you've got to really love you've got to really love bureaucracy, or be the kind of masochistic person like us that is willing to look through hundreds and hundreds of pages of this sort of thing. But
what
thankfully,
have I done to myself?
Well, thankfully, Reactive Ashleigh on Twitter made a thread going through the changes that have been made, which is a pretty condensed list. So we're going to go through that now. Now I'm quoting from Ashleigh on Twitter. We'll have the link to that thread if you want it.
Not the Ashleigh here, but another Ashleigh.
Yes, this is not
different Ashleigh.
This is not the Ashleigh at What the Trans. This is a different Ashleigh who, honestly, is always posting very good and helpful things. Reactive Ashleigh says, the topic of gender equality or women's rights has been renamed to sex. This change is part of an anti-gender hate campaign targeting feminism. Assigned gender at birth, quote unquote, has been eliminated for no apparent reason but muffled hatred. It was portrayed by hate groups as ideological, but is in fact a precise term accepted by trans and medical communities. It promotes the questionable idea that everyone has a legal sex attribute, but for trans people, this attribute is only legal. In the previous edition, the section Treatment of Trans People in Court addressed their treatment in general. It has now shifted to predominantly portraying trans people as criminals. Each paragraph portrays trans women in a negative light, depicting them as violent sexual predators, rapists, previously known as male-by victims, incomprehensible dignity subject to competing rights, and an affront to public decency. The paragraphs discussing the vulnerability of trans asylum seekers in detention has been removed. The GRA provides that a GRC affects recognition for all purposes, with some exceptions. It was correctly explained in the previous edition. The new edition, however, describes it as providing recognition for most legal purposes, which is a small difference, but it means a lot. The discussion on ICD, gender incongruence, and WPATH SOC 7 has been removed. And I'm just going to interrupt here, because that's a lot of words. This part of the document spoke about the way in which trans people are pathologized, the ongoing push to have transness recognized as diversity as opposed to an illness, and whether formal diagnosis of gender dysphoria are helpful or not, including information on trans healthcare to better inform people of what being trans can mean medically. So that has been removed. The advice that the use of transgendered as a word is removed. This is a quote that's also been removed. It may not be necessary or appropriate to refer to the person's transgender status at all. Following transition, many people may wish to be identified simply as a woman or a man, as applicable. That's been removed. The term cis is now deemed to be used less frequently, often becomes sometimes, and includes the phrase assumed to be, meaning that they are not cis. The new edition also adds a statement. Many people feel strongly that they do not wish to be described as cis. There is a questionable commentary on non-binary and gender fluidity scattered throughout the chapter. That's the end of the thread. So, these changes are a lot, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Just a couple of subtle little removals of things, mostly.
Yes, so...
So
these changes are going to leave those who use it less informed than the previous edition, which is kind of odd for a revision, unless you're of my personal opinion, which is that these changes are clearly driven by the changes that have occurred in the AHRC and current and former governments' pushes to lessen the capacity for trans people to be recognised as human in public spaces. What do we think about that as a hypothesis? Because that's kind of what I felt after seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, instantly, you mentioned... the whole part about it leaves the people less uninformed, but it also instantly integrates a sense of prejudice towards trans people as well. Mm-hmm. They're then forced to be viewed less favourably in court just because of who we are.
Yeah, and it's when it comes to the trans women stuff, like I was looking through it, and it is the kind of thing where unless you are clued into the specifics surrounding this whole thing, right? Basically, if you're in the community and you're paying attention, then you will recognize the fuckery going on. But I can imagine a cishet person who, you know, possibly doesn't even know exactly when Pride Month is, reading it and going, well, that's fair, that's fine enough, which is the worst part about it. It's the way that it encourages you to see cis as a problematic term, whilst also removing the advice to not refer to people as transgendered and to use correct terminology. You can't tell me that this is not deliberate and with the design of dehumanization and with the design of having judges confused why any, like, trans people in their courtrooms would be getting upset, stressed out when they are, as far as they see it, following the equal treatment bench book.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's dragging it backwards, isn't it? And I don't think the equal treatment bench book, although calling it an equal treatment book that's a whole thing to which we can and will object.
Yes.
But I don't think the start of this process has been made under the new government.
No.
This is an artifact of the previous one, I suspect. And I think whoever's kind of written the equal treatment bench book, whoever they've been talking to in government, has held some views, let's say.
It wouldn't surprise me if the people definitely would have been working on this behemoth of a document before the new government that's barely even 2 months old. So that's just good logics.
Yes.
It would make a lot of sense to me that they would be reaching out to people like the EHRC to have a quick round table. And I mean, if the EHRC is currently saying, well, you should just take out gender entirely from the Equalities Act, and by the way, we're working on ways to prevent them from being able to access employment or public spaces or bathrooms, then this feels gentle in comparison, but it is just as violent.
Yeah.
Yes. It's pernicious, isn't it? In the sense that it's just a few little tweaks here and there, a couple of removals here and one there, and it's going to make such a difference now to the way people, as you say, they're going to feel like they're following the rules, but the rules are fundamentally coming from a damaged, infiltrated place, essentially.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the way they made the changes to this document does give a sense of malice.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There is definitely someone that has been involved in the creation of this document, either in advising, typing. You can't make any kind of claims as to who in any specific capacity, but there has been a very clear influence with the aims of dehumanizing trans people and of viewing them as lesser and not actually upholding them to the same equal treatment that we would expect of a cis person. That's just patently obvious. Now, whether that's due to deliberate malicious intent or, you know, incompetence, I think it's kind of neither here nor there, but I feel like it's the former because there are so many direct dog whistles. An incompetent person wouldn't see why you would need to remove a bit that's just talking about trans people getting healthcare.
The bit about people feel strongly that they do not wish to be described as cis just falls out of one of those alt-right playbooks that they noticed that from Elon Musk and decided, oh yeah, I'm just going to pop that into that.
It does feel like it's definitely been done deliberately, with malice aforethought, as they would say in the legal profession. And speaking of people acting with malice aforethought, let's talk about Nazis. So, a story from those super northerners up in Scotland, where the absolutely based and seemingly pretty awesome Glasgow councillor Bailey Elaine Gallagher was recently cleared of wrongdoing after she made some comments about a Posey Parker Let Women Speak rally. Gallagher correctly pointed out that literal Nazis had attended the rally in February 2023. She made the comment shortly after the rally when she said, when an anti-trans speaker had a rally in George Square this year, it was attended by Nazis. She also described some of the rally attendees as would-be fascists and said accusations made against LGBTQ+ people leads to threats of violence, and the language used at the rally could be described as genocidal, all of which seems pretty reasonable to us, but it resulted in several complaints about Gallagher to the Ethical Standards Commissioner. The people who complained claimed that the councillor's comments could amount to bullying or harassment and were disrespectful and discourteous. The case was referred to the Standards Commission, which held a hearing in Glasgow on July 29th this year, Now, we're not going to read out every single little bit of the hearing, but suffice to say that Gallagher was cleared of wrongdoing on the basis that other rallies organised by Let Women Speak have indeed had attendees throwing Nazi salutes. They got this conclusion due to the, quote, apparently reliable evidence to the effect that similar rallies organised by the same person in other cities have been attended by individuals who had displayed clear support of the Nazis or their ideology. So supporters of Posey Parker / Kelly J. Keane Minshall are officially fascists now, kind of, which reminds me of the time Marine Le Pen sued someone who called her a fascist but lost the case when the court found out that actually she is a fascist, so there was no wrongdoing.
Nazis getting offended over being called Nazis.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
What a shame. What a shame. It must be so hurtful to have someone say that you are who you are.
Yes. How dare would they be so accurately insulted in this way?
All right. I was actually in Newcastle the same week that they were holding one of these Let Women Speak rallies in 2023. And there was a clip that went viral from
that one.
Yeah, the one where the woman starts reading from Mein Kampf. Yeah, definitely not Nazis.
Absolutely not.
Nothing says not a Nazi like reading the Nazi-in-Chief's book. That, you know, evidently, we're in the wrong for thinking that someone reading a Nazi's book at a rally attended by some Nazis is an indicator that there's Nazis there.
No, exactly.
Yeah. How dare we?
If you want like a really good succinct way to understand how perennial Nazism is and that it doesn't just pop out of a vacuum, maybe check out the song Nazis by Chumbawamba. It literally is 2 minutes of your time and it's a good little ditty, and I've been listening to it a lot recently because it just gives me a bit of strength in these times.
Yeah. And it just keeps being relevant somehow.
It does. It doesn't stop being relevant.
That's actually some good news, right?
Yeah.
In terms of not in terms of the Nazis being a thing again, which is just definitely bad news anywhere it happens, but the fact that people have complained saying this woman said some stuff that's true, and the body that they've complained to have said, nah, shut up. Completely cleared of wrongdoing.
Like people online, you can now freely call Kelly J. Keane and her associates fascists and Nazis, and they cannot legally, I mean, unless they want to just be told after paying a lot more money the same conclusion again, they're not, you know what I mean? Like we've got this down. We've got this down. They're officially Nazis.
Oh god, I won't be.
Well, in Scotland.
In
Glasgow.
In Scotland. Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe if things happen, we'll just move the trans ownership up to Scotland.
Up to Scotland. Yeah, I'm
owners.
I'm very on board for this, to be honest. Anyway,
On the day the Nazi died, the world is riddled with maggots. The maggots are getting fat. They're making a tasty meal of all the bosses and bureaucrats. They're taking over the boardrooms and they're fat and full of pride. And they all came out of the woodwork on the day the Nazi died. So if you meet
moving on from Nazi tantrums, we've got another happy story, this time in the Himalayas. So, in other areas of the world, there is also good news, though, as the Supreme Court in Kathmandu has ruled that a person should be able to change their gender on grounds of self-realization. A writ petition against the government was submitted by Rukshana Kapali after she was refused registration at a university due to her name and gender on previous paperwork not matching her current gender identity. She was also denied the ability to take any tests and have documents changed. The court found that preventing people from identifying on the basis of self-realization would be a violation of the Constitution, specifically Article 16, the right to live with dignity. They also found out that the Nepal Citizen Act allowed for people to get citizenship with regards to gender identity also. As such, the Tribhuvan University violated Rukshana's right to education. An extra nice surprise was that due to the Constitution and current Nepali law regarding the right to have personal information protected, the Supreme Court also ordered the authorities in this case to protect such information and not to reveal previous gender identities of Kapali without a court order and her written consent. Now she, and hopefully with this precedent set, others can change their documentation, even academic certificates, and have data protected with those institutions who hold old information.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just a good time. Well done, Nepal.
Yeah.
And now they're ahead of us.
As is most of the rest of the world at this rate.
Yes, I feel like that. Oh.
Yeah. But no, I was really happy to see this, and yeah, it was really nice to read the extra bit of like, oh, you're also like protecting her data, and you're like protecting her right to like privacy of not having to explain her history of gender, which I feel like a lot of trans people have to do in institutional settings, even when it's meant to be equal. And it's just, good on you, Kathmandu.
Good on you. Where is Nepal on Google?
Yeah.
Oh, it's there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's miles away.
It's a little bit of a trek.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to get a bus, at least not direct.
Yeah, indeed. You'd probably have to change at Wolverhampton. I'm always cheered up by this, hearing somewhere in the rest of the world getting it right.
Yeah.
And now you can even point to all sorts of places, dozens of countries all over the world now, and say they are doing better than the UK, and kind of shame it into action.
Yeah.
Not that that's worked so far, because shaming somebody into doing something relies on your opponent having a conscience, which hasn't been the case for the last 14 years. But
yeah, how can you get someone to care about something when they haven't developed the skill of empathy yet?
Pretty much.
And speaking of people that are lacking in empathy, let's get into Loser's Corner, baby! Yeah!
Loser's Corner.
Loser's Corner.
Loser's Corner.
Loser's Corner.
So our first loser of the day is the mean old Mr. Musk. Content warning, this first story covers parental abuse. While there are no graphic descriptions and multiple deeply satisfying claps back, there is a gentle heads up if you struggle with this topic. Our first loser of the day is the mean old Mr. Musk. Yeah, you heard that right. Evil Elon just cannot get his daughter's dead name out of his mouth. After a particularly unhinged and cruel interview from the wannabe supervillain, where he essentially disowned and misgendered his trans daughter Vivian, throwing around words like woke mind virus and born gay and slightly autistic, and claiming to be tricked into consenting to her gender-affirming care, she decided he shouldn't get the last word, releasing this on Threads. And I'm going to read it for you now.
I also love how it's on Threads and not Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah, right. She's really taking the pettiness to the core, and I live. There's a lot of stuff I need to debunk, which I will get to, don't worry. But I want to start with what I find the funniest, which is the notorious, slightly autistic tweet. This is going to be a bit, so just bear with me. This is entirely fake. Like, literally, none of this ever happened, ever. I don't know where he got this from. My best guess is that he went to the Milo Yiannopoulos school of gay stereotypes, just picked some at random and went, good enough, in a last-ditch attempt to garner sympathy points when he is so obviously in the wrong, even in his own fucking story. I did not have a love of musicals and theatre when I was 4, because, I was fucking 4. I did not know what these things were. My earliest real experience with musicals was when my twin brother had a Hamilton phase in 8th/9th grade and overplayed it so much in the car to the point where for a long time I swore off the entire genre. I never picked out jackets for him to wear, and I was most certainly not calling them fabulous, because literally, what the fuck? I did not use the word fabulous when I was 4, because again, I would like to reiterate, I was 4. Like, this is so obvious, I don't even think it warrants explanation, but apparently people believe this nonsense, so here I am. This entire thing is completely made up, and there's a reason for this. He doesn't know what I was like as a child because he simply wasn't there. And in the little time that he was, I was relentlessly harassed for my femininity and queerness. Obviously he can't say that, so I've been reduced to a happy little stereotype, along to use at his discretion. I think that says a lot about how he views queer people and his children in general. As for if I'm not a woman, sure, Jan. Whatever you say. I'm legally recognized as a woman in the state of California, and I don't concern myself with the opinions of those who are below me. Obviously, Elon can't say the same, because in a ketamine-fueled haze, he's desperate for attention and validation from an army of degenerate, red-pilled incels and pick-me's who are quick to give it to him. Go touch some fucking grass. Sparkle emoji.
That's the best public statement ever.
I know, isn't it? Like, particularly that last thread, I guess.
Now, as satisfying as that is, it's not even the end.
More public statements.
Since he wanted the world to know about his parental skills, she thought it only fair to provide her own account, and followed up her statements in an interview that went through some details of her time with him. This is a brief condensation of the full things that you can check out in the interview. She claimed he was rarely present, that he had half custody and was there 10% of the time, and when he was, he would be cold and narcissistic. That's a quote. Recalling a road trip she was taken on that was actually just done as part of a car advert, where he verbally harassed her the whole time. She would consistently be berated for her evident queerness, and by the time that she came out as trans at 16, their relationship was already strained. However, on the point of gender-affirming care, she says he knew exactly what he was agreeing to, as California law requires parental consent for gender-affirming care for a teenager. He had to. Vivian explains that while her mother was immediately supportive, evil Elon wasn't. As such, her and her father texted about it for months, even met in person to discuss it at his request, and when she gave him the forms, he read them through with her once and then again alone before signing off on them. Quote, "He was not by any means tricked. He knew the full side effects," she said. The treatment in question was puberty blockers, which she advocated for really strongly, saying, "They save lives. Let's not get that twisted. They definitely allowed me to thrive." And if you think that it's about to end here, no, it isn't, because this man is just desperate to take L's. Still trying to appear the family man, despite his fathering skills being more akin to Dr. Evil's the more and more that we learn, he decided to reply snidely to an old picture of him and his children, misgendering Vivian again. So she, yet again, puts him in his place, posting this on Threads. Look, I don't know if you genuinely believe this or if you live in your own delusional fantasy land, and frankly, I don't care. It seems to me like you're trying to rebuild your brand image as the caring paternal father, which I will not let go unchallenged. If I'm going to be honest, this is absolutely pathetic. You just won't stop lying about me in interviews, books, social media, etc. Thank God you're absolutely terrible at it, because otherwise this would be significantly more difficult. Like, neo-Marxist/communist who was brainwashed at high school to be trans and think being rich is evil is the best you could go with? Really? Like, really? If you're going to lie about me, then why would you choose the method so obnoxious in its stupidity? It's beyond stupid. It's desperate. The fact anyone believed this for even 5 seconds is beyond me. Not to mention going out of your way to misgender me, which is both completely transparent and honestly just sad. I understand your new angle is this Western values, Christian family man thing, but it's just such a weird choice. You're not a family man. You're a serial adulterer who won't stop fucking lying about your own children. You're not a Christian, and as far as I'm aware, you've never stepped foot in a church. You're not some bastion for equality and progress. You called Arabic the language of the enemy when I was 6, have been sued for discrimination multiple times, and are from apartheid South Africa. You are not saving the planet, you do not give a fuck about climate change, and you're lying about multiplanetary civilization as both an excuse and because you want to seem like the CEO from Ready Player One. I would mention the birth rate stuff, but I am not touching that weird 14 words breeder shit with a 10-foot pole. You single-handedly disillusioned me with how gullible we are as a species because somehow people keep believing you for reasons that continue to evade me.
Oof.
What a fucking legend.
I know, right? Yes, Queen.
If Vivian ever wants to chat with us on the podcast, get in touch.
And there we have it, folks. The library is now closed until Vivian decides to open it again. And honestly, I hope she doesn't have to. But if she does, I will be cheering from the sidelines. Whilst quietly, of course, because I do know my library etiquette. She is a child that has been raised not just by a father who seems wholly incapable for the job, just like every other job he has had, but also as a commodity to be referenced or used for whatever advert biography think piece that man dictated for her entire life. Good on her for taking back that power and using her voice. It's needed. After this, she is, as she put it herself, your favourite Nepo baby's favourite Nepo baby. Honestly, I love Vivian so much.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think we've become stans.
Just...
like, is that the term? That's what the K-pop people
I
use,
think it
right?
used to be. I think we might be a few years late for that one. But yeah, fantastic. And as you say, the fact that she's put it on Threads rather than on Twitter is just such a... I don't know, is that a subtweet? Are we still saying subtweet?
I think so.
It's like an extra level of petty of like, fuck you, I'm not even going to give you the engagement on your own platform. I know that my views would do better there, but you don't deserve my energy on there, which like, so valid.
No.
So
Definitely.
absolutely correct.
For those on Threads, we are also on Threads ourselves.
We're on Threads, yes indeed.
Yeah. If you don't like Twitter either, then go to Threads.
Yeah, I mean, I think people who are still committed to Twitter, it's kind of like a sunk cost fallacy thing now, where it's like...
Yeah, it's sort of... I think the only reason we're on there is because there's it's still somewhat... it's one of our bigger platforms so far.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's sort of like if Twitter goes down and is never ever used again, we've got the other platforms now, we've grown them nicely... But Twitter's sort of like it's there still, it's quite big. We might as well just post and ignore what comes on there.
Yeah. Like I've got to say, like, this is so cathartic to see.
Yes, I can imagine.
It's also like, it's exactly what you expect. It is exactly what you expect. Like, I've thought for many years, he looks like a supervillain, speaks like a supervillain, acts like a supervillain, and has the incompetence of one. I bet he is going to be like a supervillain as a father as well. And, well, look at that.
Yeah. Lo and behold.
Yeah. So, yeah. Vivi, if you ever want to come and chat, feel free. I don't think you're going to be listening to this, but, you know.
We're here.
Fucking Shyburns getting out. We have a second loser of the day, if you want to take it away, Ashleigh.
Yes, we do. And we're going back to Scotland for our second loser of the day, and the sad, hilarious tale of Kenny McBride. Kenny works for Transport Scotland. I say works for, really I mean worked. Definitely past tense, because he got his arse fired in 2023 after some extremely ill-advised posting on Yammer, which is the Scottish government's social networking site. Now, Kenny claims he was sacked because of his views on biological sex, and he went on to raise over £17,000 to pay for his legal fees. But during the legal proceedings, the panel heard from Transport Scotland that Kenny had gone much further than just some shit posting, in that he'd privately and persistently messaged other civil service colleagues he'd interacted with to the extent that those people felt, quote, harassed, intimidated and unsafe. Now, there's quite a lot of stuff in the judgment document, so I'll give you a few choice excerpts from the conclusion. Quote, on occasion, the tribunal found the claimant to be evasive, seeking to focus the issue solely on relation to his beliefs rather than upon the impact his behaviour had upon others. Overall, the tribunal found the claimant to be disingenuous in places and lacking in objectivity. This was in part because the claimant was keen to find evidence to support his erroneous belief that the respondent had a belief and that it was contrary to his. So basically, the guy wanted an argument and was keen to impose one on all of his interactions, convinced that other people A, thought differently to him, and B, needed to be talked around to his side. Again, in the judgment, we also had, it was regrettable that the claimant was unable to see matters from any other perspective. And similarly from the conclusion, the tribunal had no doubt that the claimant's belief was genuinely and firmly held, but the claimant had poor self-awareness and was unable to view matters objectively. Ooh, lack of self-awareness, burn. Those are rare. And it kind of reminds me of Graham Linehan, especially the seeking to focus the issue solely in relation to his beliefs rather than upon the impact his behaviour had upon others part. Just that complete lack of self-awareness and being so completely single issue as to lose everything, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of... Isn't that a really succinctly distilled way to signify what the fundamental headspace of, like, someone that does conversion therapy or, like, is, like, a truly bought-in transphobe does? Like, because that's what people that enact conversion therapy on their loved ones are doing. They are not considering the impact of their actions. They are focusing on what they believe and that others should have to act in accordance with those beliefs. Oh, actually, that's reminding me. There's one thing I want to add to the Elon Musk bit, which is, aside from all of the, like, haha, like, get him, clapback internet stuff of it, which, catharsis and everything aside, from what Elon Musk has been doing, according to what Vivian has been saying, I would argue is tantamount to conversion therapy, conversion abuse.
Yes. Yeah.
And let's not just let that be written off as being just a bad parent. Let's also highlight that is a form of conversion abuse that's being done when he deliberately does things to try and elicit masculinity from his child.
Yeah, neg until desistance.
Yes. And with this case here, it's the way this person was entirely focused upon his beliefs, on his argument. It seems like he viewed every conversation as a battle where he should win ground for, the removal of trans people from society. And it's just disgusting.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And seriously, the whole thing about the only reason I did a road trip with my dad was because he wanted it as a advert for his car. It's just stupid. Anyway, let's cut back to
Kenny.
Back to Kenny. Because that case reminded me. It just makes me think he was clearly trying to do the Alison Bailey argument.
Yes.
But then she still lost on the fact that on the impact of Alison Bailey's actions, still made her lose the case against her own employers.
I feel like we're going to see this again, because obviously Graham Linnon's case has gone to court. We're going to take a long while before anything comes of that, but, the losers keep on queuing up.
Yes, they do. It's the lack of self-awareness, isn't it? It's the kind of, no, I must win, I will definitely win, and kind of spaffing all their supporters' money up the wall.
Gosh, imagine what we'd be able to do with 17 grand.
Oh, I know, right? But
listen, if there's any sugar daddy angel investor that wants to just really engage in some findom and send us everything they have in their savings account, as long as they still have enough to feed themselves, we've got a Patreon. We can figure something out.
For those Finster fans, if you know 10 Muses, 10 Muses, we'd love your money. On the note of employees and unions and employment law and such, in our latest instalment of Join a Union, the British Medical Association has announced that its membership voted for the BMA to publicly criticise the CAS review. In a press release released on its website, the BMA also said that it would be putting together a task and finish group, also saying that it will be established by the BMA's Chair of Council, Professor Philip Banfield, who will also appoint the group's chairperson and will pay particular attention to the methodology used to underpin the report's recommendations. Alongside this, it has also called for a pause in implementing the CAS Review's recommendations, stating that the BMA believes transgender and gender-diverse patients should continue to receive specialist healthcare regardless of their age. In a sea of shit that we are seeing, and what we will talk about in the next couple of stories, it's good to see a group such as BMA provide some form of resistance.
Love the BMA, because we did speak about this, that they were going to vote on it, and I'm glad the vote's gone the way it should have done. Although not everybody in the British medical establishment is particularly happy about that, because the British Medical Journal, the BMJ rather than the BMA,
has released, so what they've done is they've released a letter opposing the idea of the critique being made. Now, it is on their website, but it's behind a paywall. But about 2 minutes before we were meant to go and record this, one of our
sources sent it to us.
Yeah, one of our sources just sent it to us in the best timed email I've ever seen.
Yes, that was perfect, wasn't
it?
Yeah. But even that, though, this article does say that nearly 900 doctors signed this letter, and that's not that many.
Yeah.
We've got more listeners than that.
Oh gosh, yeah. But God, we do have a lot of listeners.
No, it's a very good point. Yeah. Like, how is that meant to be a mainstream, like, enough of a, what am I trying to say here? If it's such a small proportion of the incredibly wide amount of people that are involved in healthcare that have, like, signed on to this, then I don't know. It sounds a bit like...
Yeah, so they said there's 900 doctors signing it, but according to the BMA, they have about 190,000 colleagues.
Right. So, you know, I think that's actually proportionately possibly less than the amount of trans people there are in the UK.
Yeah.
I don't know the maths on that, but I feel like the maths could easily line up that is less than 1% of the population, and we're at least 1% of the population.
Yeah.
We are the 1%.
Whoa.
So the census suggested it was 0.05% of the population, so 0.5%. And all this fuss, all this transphobia, all of this hate and fear-mongering for 0.05% of the population.
Yeah. So in letter, it was calling on the BMA to abandon its plan to do this criticism and retract its demand to allow puberty blockers to be given to children in gender-related distress. By lobbying against the best evidence available, the BMA is going against the principles of evidence-based medicine and against ethical practices.
Ooh, that's not factually true.
No, isn't science meant to be making sure you're able to make different opposing views and
back them up with evidence, which the cast review has not done. It's definitely not done. Yeah,
it is actually kind of genuinely deeply upsetting and concerning, in all seriousness, to see the British Medical Journal be so staunchly against peer review.
Yeah.
That's the thing that really concerns me. The BMJ should not be saying to such a big thing as the BMA that you shouldn't test the mettle of this document that is going to soon be used as the basis of treating everyone that's part of a certain community that's in the UK. How on earth do you get to swing that? I mean, I know that there will have been whatever reasons, justifications put in the letter, but the fact of the matter is, it's twaddle because you're arguing against peer review.
Yeah, you're arguing against making a good stringent debate.
Yeah, you should be welcoming an opportunity to further prove the efficacy of the review, because if they're undertaking something critically, that means that they are going to examine everything from the basis of it may be true or maybe not true, which means that anything that is true would be verified. Now, that's only a problem if you know that most of the shit in there is absolute shit.
It is absolute dog shit. And you can read about how dog shit it is in our deep dive episode.
Yeah.
Gosh, we're really ticking off the...
Yeah, we're ticking the boxes. Although, I mean, if you haven't listened to the cast review episodes by now, like, there's a lot in there, isn't there? All sorts of fun stuff.
I don't want to read that review ever again.
No, me neither. And ideally, I don't want to ever have to talk about it again, but here we are. So this article that's come in the BMJ does do the penultimate paragraph syndrome thing, where it says, but on the other hand, the person who would be the person who has been pushing for the review of the review said this to us. And so that's been a little more, the idea that any review, even on such a sensitive topic, should not be critiqued is, I believe, contrary to the very principles of the scientific process. So...
Science!
Yeah!
Well, scientism, if it goes this way.
Making it sound scientific without actually being scientific. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. For those that don't know, scientism is not scientific autism. It is the praxis of treating science as like a set religion with very clear doctrines of what is right and what is wrong. So you aren't engaging in the scientific practice. You are simply deifying science as an authoritative power.
Oh, thank you for explaining that. I didn't know what you meant by scientism.
I see.
It's basically Yeah, it's basically treating science as a religion.
Fun times. So we'll keep you updated on this particular story, obviously. The review of the cast review is going to go ahead, essentially. So 900 doctors, as you say, literally a drop in a bucket kind of thing, a drop in the ocean, really. But hopefully the review of the review will produce some excellent points to continue with a robust discussion, let's say.
Yeah, and we'll have to see what the review of the review of a review is.
Yeah, don't. Just don't.
There'll be a review on that one.
So on the subject of doctors and the NHS and the cast review, there are plans to roll out 6 new services in England and Wales for trans children and young people that will follow and implement the cast recommendations, and a review of adult care, which is planned and has been published on the NHS website. So we're working on a thorough examination of the proposed plans and we'll bring you more details soon, but we do have links provided in the description if you wish to find out a little more right now. So yes, definitely not looking forward to this cast style review of adult care.
No, not at all. My hope is that the BMA comes out staunchly enough that it can get enough of a ball rolling to mitigate the damage that such a review could do, and sort of galvanize the medical community to really start moving on this. Because in further updates about the NHS and their continued actions. In an article by the Daily Telegraph published this week, it was written that the NHS is about to launch its first ever service for detransitioners. So according to the Telegraph, so bear in mind it's the Telegraph, they want to make a defined clinical pathway in the NHS for individuals who are considering detransition, and that NHS England will establish a programme of work to explore the issues around a detransition pathway by October 2024. Now, I'm personally really against this. A detransition is still a transition. You're still transitioning from one place to another. Your goal may have changed over whatever period of time, but the kind of treatments that you'll be getting, they'll still be in that same area of medical care. To me, this seems like a way to encourage people to detransition by setting up this service as if it's a separate thing.
Yes.
And then you can't
as
transition
if we're here
back
to help
to the transition service if you decide to switch around again.
Yes, that's exactly another point I was just about to bring up. That it also doesn't respect the fact that a detransition isn't often going straight back to, whatever you thought and felt as a cis person. The amount of times that I've, listened to detransitioners talk about the fact of it's not that they're going back to who they were before, but it's a whole other area of the gender experience. Mm-hmm. And it's often connected to not receiving a lot of support, or to not receiving support around other factors. And because every detransitioner that I have heard or sought out their thoughts and feelings on, or trans people that I followed who have decided to detransition, they always advocate for better access to trans healthcare.
Yep.
Always, consistently, because if they have better access to trans healthcare, that would have either helped them more, it would have meant that it didn't take quite so long for them to reach whatever conclusion. There's so much of the current trans healthcare system that is actively harmful to the people that go through that process, that it sometimes makes it really hard for people to figure out where exactly they want to go and what they want to do. So this feels like division to me. And if someone wants to retransition, does that mean that they then have to face the kind of onslaught of the transition pathway and the way that that's currently being treated and basically criminalized?
And also then
you're going to be valuing one person in one way.
The waiting list as well. To then go, oh, you want to retransition again?
You're back at the start of the list.
Yeah. So what are y'all's thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, definitely it should be dealt with as part of the kind of gender service that exists. It does not need... There are not going to be enough people to sustain a whole separate service.
Yeah, I mean, people already say... People at the gender identity clinics already did that work anyway. They already had the experience and knowledge on how to handle detransition and to help people in figuring out that pathway.
Yeah.
And for adding another barrier then creates an unnecessary extra step that can then cause a less, I would even say, holistic approach to their treatment, because instead the mindset is focused around then saying making them not trans again, rather than thinking make them make them most comfortable in the gender identity they feel closest to.
My real concern here is that anybody that shows the slightest bit of, can I pause here? Do I have to go through with everything? Is going to get railroaded down a detransition service. And that is not what we want to see. And that's my fear for this.
Yeah. I have a feeling that this will be weaponized against non-binary people as well. I have a feeling that those who say would want to keep certain attributes or have an expression of their gender that's visibly, when you see it, is not particularly aligned to male or female. I don't like to say androgynous because a lot of people then assume androgynous is like completely sexless and agender, which is not really the thing. That could be seen as, so you don't actually want to transition, and things like that. And I worry for people being unfairly discharged and put into detransition spaces for perhaps wanting to be on HRT but not wanting top surgery, or vice versa.
No, exactly.
Not great at all. And speaking of things that are definitely not great at all...
So the crap from the NHS doesn't stop there. It gets worse. And for our Scottish comrades. And as of the 12th of August, the Scottish NHS will stop self-referrals to their gender identity clinics. Instead, the only way to get access to these clinics will be to have your GP refer you to mental health services and then get you access to the GIC if they think you're trans enough. A letter sent by the director of NHS Scotland that we got leaked to us said that it was a step forward and it enables us to triage care and minimise risk to patient harm. By what? Making it harder to get access to the treatment we need and making it take longer?
Apparently.
So this is going back to what this process used to be, like several years ago. So what I had to do when I was first, going through gender services is I had to get referred to the community mental health team. I had to go and have a chat with them, and that it took a year to get an appointment with them. And then from there, I was then on a 2 and a bit year waiting list to talk to the gender clinic. So it's just immediately just going to take longer. And there doesn't really seem to be a valid reason for them doing this, to me.
There's no valid reason outside of transphobia.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Because even if you make the argument of, the waiting lists are growing bigger and bigger and bigger, we want to make sure that then get some fucking funding onto that services then.
Yeah, funny that.
Then get some people actually fucking seen. Stop making it harder through continual bit of legislation, guidelines, recommendations to just view people as fucking human and let them be treated in the way that they need to be.
Or just make it primary care so the GPs can just deal with it.
Yeah, you don't get to deliberately fuck up this area of healthcare alongside every other area of healthcare, but specifically with the aims of transphobia regarding this section. But you don't get to deliberately fuck up the NHS and then say, well, we're going to remove your access to healthcare because the NHS is really bungled up right now and it's because too many of you have been trying to access healthcare.
Yeah.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
Well put.
Get to fuck. No.
So yes, it's all a bit of a mess, really, isn't it?
No.
Yeah, Scotland's been having a lot happen.
And it's bound to might even get worse with the when the MSPs get more elected again under the Scottish elections, and the Scottish Parliament, a devolution there, because if Scottish Labour start to have landslides there, they might have more, transphobic MSPs. Hope not, but it feels like it could go that way.
Yeah.
And
we just got rid of Joanna Cherry.
There is hope. There is always going to be a better day. Statistically, if you have a really shit day, the next day is bound to be a better one. Probability dictates it as such. So it's a dark time right now, and it's a tough time right now, and don't let it hold you down and prevent you from living your life as you want to live it. Now's
the time to embrace community, and mutual aid is the phrase, isn't it? Like, kind of look after each other. Because we're gonna have to. Because with this having happened in Scotland, I think it's going to happen in England as well. Perfectly honest.
Yeah, and I suppose we'll have to keep looking to our community and making sure that we fight with our community, and quite frankly, over this past week we have been seeing the community come out in force for Pride season.
Hell yeah, we have.
Bigger and better than ever.
On that subject, so we recently were all together in Manchester, and we recorded in my studio, which is my bedroom, but we recently recorded and we talked about all the various prides that we've all been to over the last couple of months, and so we're now going to just play that tape. So take it away, us in the past.
Flashback music,
Flashback. All right, welcome to, this section of the show where I am recording it from my usual studio here in Manchester, but I have some guests.
Oi, oi.
Hello. Hello there.
Yeah, coming to you from the same room for literally the first time. It's lovely to meet you all in the flesh. Well, lovely to meet you in the flesh, Flint. I've met these two reprobates before. But...
yeah, misfortune.
Yes,
these whippersnappers. Now you've got a third to add to the mix.
Fun times. So, and we're here to talk about the various prides that we've been to over the course of the last few months, from sort of June onwards. I mean, I say we, I mostly mean you guys, because the only pride I've been to is the one that we all went to yesterday, but more on that later. So, to kick it off, I'll hand over to you, Flint.
Yeah, the first one, one of the first ones we really got to in the What the Trans coverage was actually one that's pretty close to home. It was Bishop Auckland Pride. It was the first one for Bishop Auckland to ever do, which is really cool, and it's sort of in my backyard area, I'm from the northeast. I've lived here for many years now, and it was great to see another little community show up and show out for us. There was a lot of really good performers as well. So there wasn't a parade, but there was a area that was free for everyone, a community stage, and then there was an area that was ticketed. But the tickets were only 20 quid for a whole night of entertainment and then a whole day of entertainment the next day, and you could move about freely. The accessibility was really good. There were some really good performers that I really, really enjoyed. In particular, Lady Bushra did a really great bit called Sashay That Sari, where contestants had to put on a sari as quick as possible within a minute and then lip sync to a song, and the winner got a protein bar, I believe. Also, notable shout out to Jade Mere Broadhead, who plays in the band Dinky Passetti. She was doing on the community stage a song called Trans Exclusionary Reactionary Fascists, and she was singing it so loudly that I heard it from the other end of the site and went, hang on, what are those words? I need to see what this is about, and actually got me all the way over to her. There was also some fun talks. There was one on Northeastern LGBT history, which was really cool. The most interesting thing, really, about it to me was actually to do with one of the stalls that was there. The Labour stall, the Labour candidate stall. It was the only political party there, which... honestly, the less political parties at Pride, the better for me. But I understand, if Labour are there, then they, have an opportunity to show their support for the community, is what I thought. When we saw the stall, obviously I go up and I'm there with multiple friends, and there's a little activity that's there to take a sticker and put it on the area of policy that you think Labour should focus on. Bearing in mind, obviously, they're at a Pride. So when I look through the options and I don't see any queer policies or LGBT policies, bearing in mind that's been a big part of Labour's manifesto and a big part of the conversation during the election, I gently brought it up to them, and I just noticed that there wasn't this option on there, and that's where I put my sticker. And they said, oh, well, that's a good point that you bring up. The candidate will be here himself later today, and you can speak to him. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. When he turns up, me and some friends, and I'm purely speaking, honestly, as a person that's in the local area at this point. I didn't really want to do a whole, hi, I'm here from What the Trans interview. I wanted to just naturally gauge how he is showing up for his community, right? So the first question I asked him, which is a pretty easy one, was what are your opinions and feelings on the policies that are in the Labour manifesto about trans people and about LGBT rights and queer rights in general? Bless him, he was honest. He said, well, to be fair, I haven't seen them.
Right.
Yes. So this man turned up at a Pride. Well, no, let's be fair. This political party and this candidate chose to turn up to a Pride without having even looked at a single LGBT policy for their area. Also trying to then get support from the various queer people and allies there, whilst not including a single thing about queerness in what they were delivering to that space. We had a very interesting conversation. It wasn't just me, it was me and my friends, as I said. It gently solidified to me, well, no, it didn't gently, it heavily solidified for me why I don't really like political parties at Pride, because it was otherwise a phenomenal weekend, a great, great time. And it was just a bit of a shame that that level of respect hadn't been shown by those people turning up there to the space that had been so carefully and dutifully made.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd think they'd at least do a bit of reading, and I guess they were busy. So this was before the election?
This was when the election had been announced, but it was before the actual voting.
Before the election took place. You'd think you'd kind of read the room a little?
Yeah.
But plus the other thing that's just made me nostalgic really is that it cost 20 quid for more or less the entire weekend. Right. That's fantastic. Like, Manchester Pride's just gone extortionate now. It cost 20 quid for the whole weekend 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Closer to 15 probably, but now it's gone all corporate and is much more expensive.
Yeah, and I had a quick look at the sponsors. I couldn't see, be fair, I didn't do a deep dive. There were no sponsors that immediately stood out to me as problematic either, which was good to see.
Yes.
Well, on the topic of prides at home, I happen to have one in my own local area as well.
Oh.
It's quite similar to yours. We did have a parade, which was slightly different, and it was one of those more party rather than protest prides, which was kind of nice. I sort of had a small glance of the inner area. I didn't have a look, but there were also political parties at mine. Apparently the Tories hadn't turned up in over 2 years.
Good.
Nice hometown pride, simple and easy.
So the fact that it's a party rather than a protest, how do you feel about that for your hometown?
To be honest, I'm just surprised there are enough queer people to come together in my local area.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, because you live in a reasonably large city in your county, don't you? Unspecified, sure. So it's obviously going to pull in everybody from around the local area, people that maybe live in smaller towns that don't have prides themselves. And it's good that happens, but I miss the protest vibe.
Yeah.
I think that should be there, and I think that's a criticism for the big Manchester Pride that happens, it'll be happening in a few weeks from as we record this, because that's corporate as hell. So it's not a protest anymore, and it should be.
So on that topic, I went to a really interesting pride in Southampton, which is called People's Pride. In Southampton, because of this very issue, there's actually 2 prides. Well, actually, there's more than 2, but the sort of main ones that are not just like specifically to like trans people. There's Southampton Pride, which is the big corporate one, and there's People's Pride, which is sort of like a response to that, because some people didn't like that Southampton Pride takes unethical sponsors. Like last year, one of the sponsors was ExxonMobil, of all things, and then lots of people like bullied them into taking it down. But they still take other bad sponsors like the local cruise ship companies that are really bad for the environment. They do march and everything, but it's quite corporate-sized. From personal experience, the accessibility, like Autism Vice, is not the best. People's Pride is like a charity that some local people started as a response to that, to make a pride that is ethical. And I went to the Party in the Park event, which was on the 8th of June. It wasn't actually too different from Southampton Pride itself, but the nice thing is that it was outside, so already the noise level was less. And it was a really nice day, which helped a lot. There were lots of like different local businesses and like stalls and artisans and things. And there was live music and even some like attractions. Like I went on this like spinny thing. It was fun. But I guess the point of it is to have the same fun of Pride without the destructive funding sources. The previous events that they've done also did include like more sort of radical protesty things, but this time it was just a party. And yeah, it was quite chill and nice and like family friendly.
Because whenever you talk about the sponsor, whenever I hear ExxonMobil, like for a moment now, I think, oh, is it a mobile phone provider? No, it's fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Sorry, babe.
It was a similar sort of party vibe at Bishop, but I was a bit more forgiving on that because it was the first one. I can understand it being a little bit nerve-wracking trying to organise a march for a first ever time. So I'm hoping that, you know, next year, there seems to be plans for next year, so I'm hoping that like we'll get more of that.
Yeah, on that point, I don't tend to go to these kinds of events for the whole day unless I'm volunteering, because I just get like kind of aimless and bored unless I'm actually doing something. So like here I'm with all of you, you know, like handing out stickers and networking. At this event, I was doing some Extinction Rebellion volunteering, running a stall together with Greenpeace. Because it was just before the election, we're ramping up Greenpeace's climate voter campaign. But there's also a campaign called Fossil Free Pride, which is trying to get Prides to agree to not take on unethical sponsors. And we at What the Trans actually have had dealings with them before when we got nominated for Pink News Awards. And then they got in touch with us and were like, hey, did you know that Pink News Awards has evil banks as sponsors? And we're like, oh. And then we publicly were like, no, we don't want this award.
Yes.
And then everyone clapped.
Yeah, it was a very satisfying statement to write, wasn't it?
Yes.
Going to like what you brought up about struggling to be there at a full Pride day because there's a lot going on. It reminds me a lot about the second lot of Pride stuff that I went to, which actually, yes, it was happening in Pride season, but it was ran by a husband duo who own a bookshop in Durham. Shout out to Bookworm. Gorgeous little stall in the market hall in Durham there, and they set up perennial queer events. So there are events for queer people throughout the year, but for the Pride season they obviously do a little bit more. And they do a thing called Big Gay Picnic, which is a sober Pride, and it's deliberately kind of designed to be a little bit different from the immediate things that you associate with Pride of loud noises, bright lights, lots of, you know, fanfare, lots of walking around energy, and, you know, lots of spoon usage. And instead they hire out a small field area, and they bring some snacks. They encourage people to bring blankets, picnicking things, and they will have just a beautiful, lovely little time for us quieter queers. I say us quieter queers. I'm not necessarily one of them, but I need both. I love all different kinds of events, and I have many friends who wouldn't be able to hack doing a full day out and about, doing a London Trans Pride, doing a big thing like that. But this means that they can still enjoy that community, and it means that families can be there. They recently celebrated their second birthday as Bookworm, where they had readings by a really, really good author called Dean Atter, who's award nominated, has been in the public eye for years, has done amazing poems, spoken word, and has written a book you probably know of called The Black Flamingo. And he was reading from his personal memoir that he's recently released called Person Unlimited, An Ode to My Black Queer Body. And it's really beautiful to see that there are these places, and that it is a case of just finding them. It's a case of us. When I say us, I mean people that are in media and people that are in the community as well, to trying to search them out, uplift them, ensure that we are giving them the same level of this needs to be here as we do for the big protest prides, as we do for the big party prides.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll talk about those quieter spaces a little bit more later. But as a queer that has sensory issues, that's part of the reason why I didn't go to London Trans Pride. Also because I had just gotten back from another event and I was completely just like out of spoons. But I don't yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it. So it's really good. You know, like sometimes I wish there were more like queer cafes rather than like queer bars.
Yes.
If that makes sense, because that's much more my vibe.
No, I struggle with straight up bars. I prefer an event or a cafe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because speaking of those events and uplifting them, you've written a piece about this, didn't you?
I did. One of my friends had brought up, oh, there's a big gay picnic happening. Would we all like to go? You know, and they had already been going to Bookworm a fair bit, which is how they came across the event. When I was there, it was just seeing such a different vibe, seeing such a, you know, a thing that I knew would not get spoken about in the wider coverage of Pride stuff, not only because it's a small indie thing, you know, with the less than 100 people there, but because it's not the immediate exciting spectacle of Pride that you expect and that is easier to report on, right? Yes. So I felt like a real need to, get the word out. So there is a full article. There is actually for Bishop Pride as well. I decided to get as much rep for the Northeast as possible in this Pride season. So there is actually an article about Bishop Pride. If you want to go check that out on the What the Trans website. There is also an article about Bookworm and the like Pride events that they're setting up, the queer events they're setting up, and also a review of the book that Dean Atta was reading from, because there I ended up reading the whole thing afterwards and it was just too good not to at least put a little bit out there and be like, check this out, it's sick.
Cool.
And we'll put that link in the description.
There you go. Tick that one off on your bingo cards.
All three of them.
So staying in Southampton, what else was there?
Well, there was also Southampton Trans Pride on June 29th, which was a lovely event. It had both a march and an indoors event. Yeah, the march was really nice, kind of just through the city centre. And there was a lovely show of solidarity as well, because at the same time as that, a protest against Barclays was taking place because of Barclays' involvement in the Palestine genocide. And it's kind of difficult for some of the people because there's quite a few people who are involved in both of those things. And so some of them didn't know like which one should I go to. But we decided that we would just kind of support each other. And like, so when Trans Pride passed by the pro-Palestine people, we were all like, whoa, free Palestine. And they were also like, whoa, Trans Pride. Trans Rise. So it was really nice. This isn't really Pride, but something similar happened when I went to Restore Nature Now in London a few months ago, which was this huge nature march. Because at the same time there was, I think, Dyke March also coming through London, and both of the marches were kind of going in like the opposite directions from each other. And the same thing happened. Everybody was just like supporting the other side of the road.
Yeah, supporting each other's causes.
Act now.
Yeah. Solidarity forever.
Yeah.
Yes. And then for Trans Pride Southampton, there was also an indoor event at a local place called Edmund Hill Unitarian Church, which is actually a really lovely space that hosts lots of different social justice events. So there's been like Palestine fundraisers, they host like Just Stop Oil meetups and like addiction support groups and just like lots of good things like that. And yeah, there were also like a few stalls. I was doing XR stuff again. And then there was also an open mic at the end, which I didn't go to because I ran out of spoons. It was really good.
Talking about solidarity between movements, this is a notable mention, to be honest. This is an honourable mention because it's something that I often don't see spoken about, something that I would love to write a bit more of an in-depth piece on or something. But so I'm a festival goer. I'm not usually a big Leeds, Reading download kind of person. I prefer the smaller indie festivals because I find that they have a really good grasp on that very thing, on solidarity between movements. So my favourite festival is Bolter. At Bolter they have a drag competition every year. I'm not sure, I didn't actually catch the one from this last year if it was on, because it was the first and ever only boggy Bolter, where rain came down and it was walking through quicksand. But every year they will do a drag competition. They'll decide on who is Miss Bolter, and they'll have drag queens that are the judges. And you're encouraged, as ever at festivals, but particularly at Bolter, you're encouraged to dress as weirdly and wonderful as you want. You are encouraged to play around with gender. If you decide to go in a standard t-shirt, standard shorts, standard trainers, you can. Absolutely, you're right. But I tell you what, you'll have a much more fun time if you decide to play around with the gender of it, if you decide to dress up in some weird and wonderful ways. And so many of the acts that are at Bolter are queer or are queer aligned and are outspoken politically. Biggest notable mention would be to Mandy Dextrous, who is an incredibly incredibly vocal advocate for trans rights, being non-binary themselves. Has been one of my favourite DJs for years. Is part of the reason why I decided to go to Bolton, was because them and a lot of other crews and people that I know go there. Another one is Scottish Gabba Punks, who are a sickening band. Absolutely go and check them out. These are people that will dress in the colours of Iron Brew, wearing fishnets. They will chant for a free Palestine and trans rights, waving the two flags together, tandem, over screaming metal gabba. It's gorgeous. It is gorgeous. And when at Bolter, it's another thing of like, even this isn't just the individual acts. This is having on the big main stage of Bolter, the MC of that stage, he will make a point, and this is the third time I've been to Bolter now. He's made a point every single time for a really big headliner that, you know, everyone in the place is going to be absolutely there for. He'll make a point to say, when we collect like this, when we come together, that is part of direct action. That is revolutionary. This is deliberately moving away from the societal constructs of what is fun, of what is art, and it's something that at other festivals I would be immediately much more critical of. But when you see how frequently, like this is a festival that has a whole stage called Pin the Dildo on the Tory, and there was a clip of that stage that I managed to get onto Have I Got News for You. Like, they are so consistently, actively in the sort of sense of getting you to think about the politics as you are participating in what otherwise would just be an event with some DJs.
Yeah.
And that's something that I love. It's something that I see in free parties. Whenever I go to free parties, there's always going to be queer people that are there. And yeah, just shout out to that because it's sick.
So you're talking about festivals that aren't themselves specifically queer, but will have like a queer event / space / stage for like an afternoon, and it'll be a queer section in it.
So there's not a specific queer space. The whole space itself just queers reality. all of the stages at Bolter, and this is another reason why I love it, is that all of the stages you can see from the bottom to the top has different sort of reflections of different areas of the UK. So you've got the Off Minute stage, that's representing the Northwest. You've got the Northern MC representing the Northeast. You've got the Devon Rave massive at the bottom. So the whole thing is like a little mini map of all the counterculture that's happening in the UK at the time, which is why it makes it feel so inherently political as much as you want it to be. You can decide to engage with it. It's just a fun time.
Of course.
That sounds sick.
I remember I was watching Have I Got News for You, and then I saw the Pin the Dildo on the Tory, and I just realised, oh, that was there.
Yeah. How was Butterfield?
It was good. I have to say, I think I've not been to that many festivals, but I think it was my favorite that I've been to because it's very chilled out. It's drug and alcohol free, so there's not as many weird people as usual. I mean, okay, no, people are still pretty weird, but not in like a drug way. Just in the hippie Buddhist way. And I was volunteering with a group called Disabled People Against Cuts this time, helping out with an art installation and then also doing a bunch of outreach about the horrors of PIP and Universal Credit, and basically encouraging people to take action. But outside of that, in my free time, I wasn't dying from the heat and all my health issues. I wasn't having the best time. A lot of the time I kind of just wanted to like lie down on the floor, which is also what I'm doing now. Well, on Ashleigh's bed. But yes, I'm doing this lying down because my body's awful. However, when I was able to, I hang out in the queer space a lot because yes, there was a whole queer bit of the festival where basically a bunch of queer people will like kind of could like come together, and it was a very welcoming space. So it's not like everybody that knew each other. No, you just walk in and everybody just instantly is like, hi, do you want to camp with us? Do you want to hang out? Do you want a cup of tea? Like, it's really sweet. So Butterfield there's like different affinity spaces for different groups. So there was like a men's space, women's space, queer space, the 3 genders. I think there was some other ones as well, but I can think of those 3. We floated the idea of potentially a disabled affinity space next time. Who knows, maybe it will happen. God knows it means that the physical accessibility was not ideal. But for autism, accessibility was pretty good. I think a lot of people in the queer space are radical fairies, which is this kind of movement of queer people who want to be closer to nature. Some radical fairies are more like kind of like spiritual and witchy, and some of them are less so. It's kind of a very diverse group, and it would be actually really interesting to maybe have some of them on the pod sometime. I did make some connections. Yeah, so I went to a few workshops in the queer space. There was a queer well-being workshop that gave me a whole future podcast idea about how we can all look after each other. There was a story sharing workshop where we talked about our queer superpowers. Mine is making people trans. That's right, I'm the trans person the media warned you about. I'm going to trans everybody in my vicinity by releasing my spores into the atmosphere.
Valid.
And then there was also a life drawing workshop, which basically, life drawing is like usually nude people posing, and then you draw them like for a set amount of time, so like 20 minutes, 10 minutes. And it was an interesting life drawing workshop because it was kind of like had this like mindfulness-y vibe, because the host of the workshop was also like saying like, as you draw it, like think about the significance of doing this in the queer space, you know, like celebrating queer bodies. Think about like what the pose expresses, like the gentleness or like the passion or whatever. And yeah, it was really nice. It's nice to have a space when you're not a minority, I think. And in that sense, I feel like it's not too different from Pride. Like, you know, most of the time, we as queer people, and especially trans people, are kind of a minority in society. And even in spaces when we are included, we're still different from most other people. And it's kind of like we're like an afterthought. And that's why it's really nice to have spaces where that's not the case and where it's more like the cis heads are the afterthought, you know? Kind of like what the trans.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and exactly. And sort of you probably had that bit of fun with Northern Pride as well.
Yeah, so Northern Pride is the really, really big pride, the one that everyone knows about in the Northeast. It's in Newcastle, and there's a big parade, a big march, and then there is, I think, 3 days of festivities. I only went to the march. It was a massive march. The overall amount of people that were, I think, involved in the march and then also involved in the full days of festivities and everything came to around about 82,000, which is more than it was last year. Last year it was about 75,000 people. On the one hand, it's lovely to be in a space where you're around other queer people. You're just consistently around other queer people. However, the thing with Northern Pride, which was interesting for me being there, was the amount of corporate sponsorship they have. Now, as far as I remember and recall, they don't have any horrendously glaring sponsors. I think there may have been at one point, but I think there was a successful removal of those. The interesting thing with the parade is that it feels more like a parade than a march. Let me put it that way. You have groups there like BT, you have, you know, various charities and whatnot that are good, but you do have a fair few, like, you know, companies that have given a lot of money so they get to march in the parade. My favourite thing about the march, aside from all of the wonderful signs, the amazing outfits people were wearing, the chants and all that, and me and my friend, because we both have pretty loud voices, were happy to lead the chants in our area, because in our part of the parade, because we were far enough back we couldn't hear the first round, so we were just having to kind of infer and keep it going through the back. There was a group of people that had recognised this, that had recognised the level of corporate involvement and decided to turn up with a corporate banner of their own saying, Pride, it's a marketing campaign. And they had lots of, they had like little printed pictures of the various sponsors that were for Northern Pride there. And they were before the corporate section. They were before all the, so they were there ahead of everyone. And they were doing this fun like, hi, yeah, let's come collab. And all of this kind of stuff that was great. And they were handing out these pink washed banknotes. They were like, oh, come take some of our money, and it would be like pink hued and things. And just in general being
really sarcastic,
like gleefully sarcastic in a way where if you had an issue with it, it showed much more about your allegiance to Pride and to queer people than it does about your company's right to be there. It shows a certain level of internalizing the notion that companies have a right to be at Pride because people will want to be a part of their company and be there. And yeah, it's interesting because for some people that work in those companies, they either would have to spend the day at work and be paid to ignore the biggest pride that's happening in the area, or for some of them, they can decide to go to work and get a longer break in the middle of the day to then go to Pride and still get paid for it, which is interesting as a choice because that means that, you know, for a queer person, that can kind of put you in an awkward bind. You either avoid it or you get a chance to go and vibe it out, but you have to then be there with the people of your company. But if you're a straight person, if you're a cishet person, I wonder if then for certain scenarios what that then would mean about, how many of those companies are perhaps actually making sure that it's the queer people from their companies that are there to represent, as opposed to just the people that want to be there for a bit of a break and fun party time and that sort of thing. It feels quite hollow sometimes.
Oh yes, absolutely it does. I quite like the sarcasm of Pride, it's a marketing opportunity. And I think that was like, I think that's probably going to have gone over a lot of people's heads.
Yes.
Like, oh, I don't get it, but I think it has always annoyed me, certainly when I was like the queer person marching in a corporate parade, and there were several straight people there who were just there for the party, and it's like, this ain't for you, Chief. This is not your day. But...
Well, part of the reason why I know about the ability to go to Pride or be paid or not or whatever is because I had a friend that was going to Northern Pride who was put in that exactly same position.
Right.
And they are a queer person, but the unfortunate thing is that because they were marching with their company, the other people that they were marching with really took offence to this group of people. And they really didn't... Bless them, they tried their best to explain to their co-workers that actually those people are correct. And let's take a moment to think about why you're here. Let's take a moment to think about what we are doing here as representatives of a corporation. They really, really tried to sort of get them to understand that it's not about you, it's not attacking you as a person. It's pointing out a hypocrisy in the way that capitalism will sort of put you in this awkward double bind situation where you have to choose between a day's wage or like your ability to be a part of it and the whole hollowness of it all. They weren't getting it. A lot of them really weren't getting it, and it kind of, at the end, my friend ended up saying, I'm not doing that again. Like, next time I'm just going to book the day off well in advance so that they can't do that, because it ended up being quite an uncomfortable experience, because it was essentially doing a lot of emotional labour for, they weren't all straight people, but a lot of emotional labour for the kind of LGBT trademark people that are quite able to exist in cishet society without much of a second thought to those of us that don't get that ability and have to go to these protests to have a moment where we are with others like us.
And speaking, I guess, of prides that don't accept corporate sponsorship at all, let's talk about Brighton.
Yeah, because I was just about to be like, oh, I know the perfect segue to talk about Brighton Trans Pride, and bam, you beat me to it. Brighton Trans Pride was the next protest we went to. I think it was actually the day before. We sort of did a tweet thread at the same time, me and you, Flip.
I think it must have been on the same day, because we were tweeting on the same day the events that were happening. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the exact same day. And there was, if you were following our Twitter at the time, it would have been quite, we had it nicely set up so it was two separate threads, but if you were just scrolling through whatever, you'd have seen Pride happening in two very separate parts of the country at the same time, just, 2 for 1.
I did see that, and I was like, "Whoa, what the trans really is?" I feel like with thriving, there's like so many different voicings going on. That's why sometimes I struggle to actually find a time to post things on socials. I still need to post pictures from Southampton Trans Pride. I think I will at some point, because
we'll have
there was some good signs.
See about that one as well, though it was quite nice when doing those tweet threads as well, being like, oh, look how professional we are, we can report in two places at the same time. Although, sorry for everyone on the timelines who was like thinking, what else is there apart from Brighton Trans Pride and Northern Pride at the same time? But yeah, it was sort of a massive march, because we were reporting on the massive march that was going on at the same time. So Brighton Trans Pride, it was massive last year. It was gigantic this year. Unfortunately, I couldn't really go up and down the marches like I usually do for every single Pride, because London Trans Pride, I could go up and down all the time. Essex Pride, I was going up there 4 or 5 times between the crowds. But this year, I fucked my foot.
Not literally, I hope. Sorry.
I'll leave that to the audience's imagination, I think. It was more like I couldn't walk properly on it, but at the same time I had to then go out and do a live tweet thread while also taking photos. I was going to take some nice photos with my big camera, but then I couldn't, because I was like, I need to... I can't do 3 things at once, so instead I'll do 2 things at once, which is walking and reporting with a phone. It was a gigantic parade, and going up and down it was a pain in the neck. And there was some the day before. That's when some of the interesting side stories I have about the Brighton Pride as well. So on the day I commuted to Brighton, if those people who remember, there was the big IT outage of 2024, where I took the day off from work in IT. I mocked my colleagues on the group WhatsApp for my work WhatsApp, and then went on my jolly way, vlogging my way to Brighton Trans Pride.
And injured your foot.
And killed my foot because train travel was disrupted that day as well.
I see.
Once I arrived at Pride and pre-buggered my foot, I then went to... because last year I went to a pub called The Actors where Ashleigh was doing a wonderful performance with St. Lucifer. Buy their albums, they're really cool. I knew that pub was really nice, so I went there for a drink the night before the pub. I spoke to some trans folk in the pub as well, but then, as you saw last episode, Susie Green then walked in the room, being the biggest news story of that day after unveiling and trans healthcare, which was crazy. I hadn't had any, and sort of all of a sudden we had that off the cuff interview, which you can
you can check
back in the next episode.
I was
In
so
the last
lucky.
episode.
I was like, what the fuck is my luck? Apart from that, the march went really well, and as always, it was great to see no sponsors at a Pride.
Yeah.
And because the main big thing is about Brighton Pride, the one before it, then having some issues.
Yeah, it was something that got me as well with Northern Pride, was seeing the giant Nor Pride and Genocide flag there, and lots of again that solidarity between different movements that I think really ramped up once the election had sort of finished. It seemed to be a difference in the fervour and the level of ferocity that people were bringing, because we recognised that really for trans people and for many queer people we were sitting in a situation of here's the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yep.
And the biggest example of this, I think, is London Trans Pride, which is also, funnily enough, the first time that I've got to meet some of these lovely people here in this room for the first time, which was great. And,
One of them.
well, one of them. The really cool thing about London Trans Pride was firstly that there was none of the really big corporate sponsorships and whatnot, which when you compare it to London Pride in general, which I didn't go to, you went to, I don't go to London Pride overall because it's so big and they always have sponsors I'm not fond of.
I've been there twice now. I don't think I need to go again.
Yeah.
It's sort of one of those where you've done it twice. I've seen the Pride march up and down. One of the main big things, which I think, as you said about Brighton Pride, is there's the whole thing about sponsorships and the ethical situations with taking money from corporations complicit in genocide. And there were a fair share of a few there as well.
Yeah. So that was London Pride and big Brighton Pride, and it's almost certainly going to be the case at the big Manchester Pride at the end of this month.
Didn't Palestinian protesters stop the march, or
There was a Pride in Toronto in Canada that did sit in and stop the march, and then I think the Pride had to get cancelled or something.
Oh, okay, I've just got my facts wrong on that, then never mind.
It's all right.
But it was it was a cool story though.
Yeah.
We're out standing up. Because they say we're standing up for Palestine.
Yeah, but so yeah, like comparing the issues with London Pride compared to Trans Pride in London was just night and day. First of all, I think the biggest, most glowing thing about London Trans Pride was the accessibility. At the very front of the march was the accessibility block, and that was specifically for people who needed mobility aids, people who, for whatever reason, would not be able to stand in a sea of people going at whatever pace the sea of people were setting. And, you know, having the people that we really should have to adjust our rhythm of movement for to accommodate them at the front just naturally resolves so many of those issues. Yes. And also puts that intersection between disability and medical care and access to trans healthcare and trans rights, you know, it highlights it importantly and necessarily so. And so many marches this year were chanting Free Palestine, and that's so fucking great to see. And at London Trans Pride, it was overwhelming. There was so many amazing signs, so many amazing people. There was different groups and communities there. Queer AF were there. I remember actually at one point at the front where I was just trying to, you know, get pictures and things, I turned and looked to my left, and suddenly there was Yasmin Finney from Doctor Who and Bimini just stood there, and I was like, ah!
It'd be like that in London.
Oh my god! So yeah, and you know, obviously I was not about to turn that into a, oh my god, hey, you know, or any of that stuff. I just took note and went, that's very cool, and then I carried on pushing.
Next time you can give them a business, with the trans business card.
Well, I mean, if they aren't already busy, they were leading chants and things.
Hey babes, this is what the trans.
But yeah, they had like so many, they had speakers there. They had Jessa Thompson, they had Sarah Jane Baker, Olivia Campbell Cavendish as well speaking, and yeah, there was a massive Palestine block as well, and just so many groups just showing up, and it was great. It was double the amount, nearly 60,000 people, which is double the amount of what it was last year from what we can estimate, and it really went off without a hitch considering the blistering heat. We only had a few stoppages for pretty understandable reasons, and when we got there to the I keep going to call it the Arc de Triomphe, but it's not. It's the Arch of Wellington. As we're all sat there, they had free water to give out as well, just free water for people, and you could sit and you could vibe, and it was a nice and easy time. And you know, I feel like that same energy was then transplanted, well, I think that same energy carried to Manchester Pride, which I think is your forte really, is the resident here.
Manchester Pride happens in the August bank holiday weekend, always has. But this was grassroots, no sponsors, no corporate sponsors, in fact, no sponsors of any kind, I think. You know, more along the lines of Trans Pride Brighton and Trans Pride London. And it too was considerably larger than what it was last year. Last year was the very first one it had ever done. And this year, the size of the march was at least doubled. They had a lot of events, you know, booked around the march. So the march was obviously the main thing, but there was also a stand-up comedy night over at the Feel Good Club. There were 2 different talks in the art gallery, in Manchester Art Gallery along Mosley Street, and they had like a, you know, Trans Pride after party over at Frey Island. Anybody who's listening to this from Manchester is probably like, oh, I know that place. So yeah, but the main thing that was a bit of a hindrance, both for us, like physically reaching the spot where the march was to start from, and just a general problem in Manchester yesterday, was the fascists. People who a few years ago, before it like officially stopped, people who would have been in the EDL, people who would have been in the BNP, all of those people, they were gathered in Manchester. Obviously, a lot of them had got the train in from out of town. But there were quite a lot of cities yesterday where some of these people who had their distorted misinformation narrative about what happened in Southport.
Yes.
Because those fasci people were giving the police a hard time on Piccadilly Gardens, which is the route we would have taken. We would have just gone straight across the gardens from here where we are and down to where the march was starting from in Castlefield. But we couldn't do that. We couldn't cut straight across. We had to take this real arse-about tit way to get to the start of the march, so we would avoid the fascists.
Yeah.
And on the march itself, we had to we saw a few times the march kind of turned back on itself and went down a different street. It's because the police directed us to go down a different street, and if, you know, had we ignored them, there would have been a problem, I suspect. But ultimately, we got turned around like twice, you know, by the police saying don't go up there because of the fascists, which essentially means because they weren't letting large groups up towards Piccadilly Gardens, the fascists essentially went unopposed.
Yes.
The counter-protesters didn't get anywhere near them because the police wouldn't let them. So the fascists just had the city yesterday.
Yeah. It was a horrible thing because obviously this is a very recent rise in these kinds of disgusting gatherings of people who have a complete detachment to reality at this point. And there is a lot of... It was also difficult getting back. We had to stop because we had to consider route plans and whatnot. We just saw that there was a lot of police on the streets trying to direct people about, stopping people for any little thing. And it seemed that their focus was much more on the counter-protesters and on the people in trans pride and managing us as opposed to managing the fascists. And at the end, me and Kai were sort of split off a bit just to grab some stuff and to make sure things were chill. And when we came back, we came up to near the bus stop that we needed, and we saw all of the fashion, all of the icky white and red glory. We were trying to figure out the best way to not get any nearer to that. We ended up chatting to a lovely woman who noticed the shirts that we were wearing and wanted to speak to us for a little bit about that. So we engaged in some conversation, and then they started to dissipate. They had been basically the sort of event that they'd been holding, the gathering, started to dissipate and people started to shoot off, and then we suddenly realised, now they're all going to be on the buses and the trains. So we had to get an Uber back. And now, listen, small price to pay, literally, it was a very small fee, but the fact that we had to do that because the police wouldn't do what is frankly their job was not just shitty, it was just a real big sign of the times. And for other people in other scenarios, they wouldn't be able to just hop into a taxi with no pre-planning or regard for whatever accessibility needs. And so really it was down to a position of privilege that we were able to get out there as quickly and easily as we were, and that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was actually a little bit scared as well in the evening when I was going back to my hotel for the same reason, because I was kind of worried. I was still wearing my What the Trans t-shirt, and I was like, oh, what if some of them are still like out there in the streets? But I was okay, nothing happened. But it's just like, even the fact that I have to worry about it and feel unsafe in like such a major city, literally, like I'm not doing anything. I'm literally just a trans person being open in a public space. I shouldn't fear getting attacked by some fascists.
Yeah.
It should just not be a thing.
And seeing the violence that has been caught on camera of the fascists, for those people that did end up too close to them, and they ended up like attacking people and destroying important community places like libraries and things like that. It's hard to put into words the level of anger and disgust at the fact that this has just been allowed a sort of free roam when we know the level of continual, constant issues that there are with trying to organise protests, trying to prevent that kind of hate speech, actful incitement of violence and hate speech. It takes a shit ton of organisation to figure that stuff out. Seeing the difference in how it is treated is just not, it's just so much.
Yeah, it's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, I was really fancying a Greg's at one point, and there were 3 riot vans outside of one of the Greg's, and I think they saw me coming their way and ran away. They were like, I'm not doing this shit. Alyx is too powerful. Give her food.
So funny.
To bring things up a little, as we finish up this segment, what was your favourite protest sign? Because I've got mine, I know what mine is, and everybody's quickly scrambling to look through the What the Trans Instagram. And it's okay to all have the same one. I'm going to start, though, which is one of the ones from yesterday, and it's got this really joyful person with a sign saying, I transitioned and all I got was this lousy gender euphoria. Fantastic. Excellent sign work.
Oh yeah, that was such a brilliant one. The person who was holding it was really cool. I had another really good one. It was saying, every fascist's doorstep is a gender-neutral toilet.
Nice.
I have a few. I'll just speed run through mine. So one of my favorites was actually a very simple sign. It didn't have any artwork. It just had words on it. And it was a teacher, a non-binary teacher in Southampton, that had a sign saying, if teaching about trans people loses me my job, then fire me, I dare you. Simple to the point, and I don't know, big dick energy or whatever genitalia they like to have. And I also made a sign. We made our own signs the night before the Pride. I made a sign specifically for Manchester Trans Pride, and it says, Manchester, noun, a person who has undergone top surgery.
I must admit, though, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's so good. That's so funny.
Well, you had some comments on it on the day, didn't you?
Yeah, it made people smile. It made me happy.
Yes. Better than mine, which said, time for some gay space communism.
It was very good, especially that picture of us when the word from What the Trans got cut off,
yeah,
and then
so
it said,
what time for some gay space communism? What time is it? Time for gay space communism. I wish I could just make that time happen. Anyway, but Flint.
Well, the one that I made, since we're talking about the ones that we made, was I made one using a stencil that Ashleigh had that said, trans punks smash the system, but cis isn't cis, right? Which was really cool, and I love that. But it's so hard to pick quickly, but I will say probably, so one of my favourite ones was, you wouldn't steal a cis person's hormones, because they aren't. There was also cis isn't a slur, but the way you wear it is offensive.
Yes, I saw that one.
And then there was a really gorgeous one, like there were two really uplifting ones that I loved, which was queer joy is an act of resistance. And then this beautiful one that I saw, which was, the only choice I've ever made was to be myself.
yeah.
And if there is not a quicker, easier way to sum up what we are doing when we're fighting for these rights, it's that.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Hell yeah.
I really like the blahages too.
Maybe that's
So many blahage.
maybe that is the answer to the question of what the trans.
Lahage.
No,
True.
Leave it at that, leave it at that.
yes, but I meant the choice thing.
What's your takeaway from Pride season 2024?
I've stopped calling summer summer. I just call it Pride season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fuck summer. Call it. Yeah, it's just Pride.
Yes.
All day.
Yes.
Warm weather and gayness. What can be better?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, yeah. Like, solidarity forever. Like, because I've often not been able to get to prides or to sort of, big events and protests and stuff. I'd have to be very careful about what accessibility wise I'd be able to do. And being so much more involved this year has been so good for my mental health. It's been so good as to quote Vivian, go touch some fucking grass. This has been that for me. It's been it's so easy, especially when now we're doing like media stuff, or now that I'm doing like media stuff, I suppose, to get lost in the doom scrolling. And part of the thing that I love about What the Trans is that doom scrolling has a reason and a purpose and a place. But being able to just get, feet on the ground, in touch with real humans, real communities, doing real shit, it's what we're here for. And if you're feeling alone, if you're feeling isolated, maybe go and check out one of the, I'm sure, local queer events that will be about. Yeah, because that power of community has been the thing that I just keep coming back to, and it's made all of the continual hits that have happened be easier to take, and also the power of the difference in protests, because Pride is very much a happy, we're going to sing, we're going to dance, we're going to cheer, and there are other protests that aren't like that, and I think that's something that does set apart Pride, at least within our cultural sphere. Within our
I do like the good mix.
Yeah, I like a good mix,
Yes.
but I think that with Pride, with Pride parades in particular, and Pride marches in particular, there's protest, obviously, but there is the joy and the revolt of rebellion of being who you are authentically. That is something that is quite nicely unique to Pride stuff, because obviously the lens and the perspective of any community when they're protesting is going to be different, even if that thing of actually no, I'm a good human and I deserve respect is a core that you will find at almost every single protest.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, that's a pretty solid and cheerful-ish note to end on, so thank you for that.
No, exactly. I think at the end of Manchester Trans Pride, we also got to show off some pride about What the Trans as well.
Yes, because we have merch. We got some t-shirts done as a kind of proof of concept, as some kind of test runs, and there's some pretty great stuff that we've that we've got coming. So we've got patches, we're talking about badges, we've got t-shirts, some of which we're talking about making for Patreons, and some of which we're talking about just putting in a shop. So let us know if you'd have a t-shirt. But otherwise, you can find us on our shiny website, which has yet to be a victim of enshittification. So that's whatthetrans.com. You can find us on Twitter, we're on Threads, we're on... What's the other one that's
Instagram?
Not Threads? Blue Sky?
Oh, Blue Sky. Hold on, I can do a proper list here. So we've got Mastodon, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Threads. We also post on Transgender UK on Reddit, Blue Sky, and if I've missed any out, you can find our contact page where we have all our social medias linked in there.
Yeah.
Super duper. But yeah, that's it. That's the episode. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Bye!
Bye-bye. This episode of What the Trans was written, produced and presented by Ashleigh Talbot, Alyx Bedwell and Flint. It was edited by Amber Devereaux and Oliver Morris, and with opening theme music composed by Waratsara Yui Karlberg. An episode transcription performed by Sam Wyman, Rowan B., Rachel Aldred and Georgia Griffiths. We would also like to thank our producer-level Patreons, who are Brooke Rayburn Findlay,
Stephen Blakemore,
Neo Arte,
Crazy Richard,
Needles and Threads,
Flaming Daphne,
Dr. McGee,
Genevieve Dixon,
Rachel Harris,
Katie Reynolds,
Georgia Holden Burnett,
Grabalicious,
Alex T,
Root -1,
Gray,
Elizabeth Anderson,
Bernice Roust,
Ellen Meller,
Jay Hoskins,
Trowan,
Ashleigh,
Matty B,
Setcab,
Jane,
Roberto de Prunk,
Rose Absolute,
Sarah,
Sina,
Gigi T,
D,
Sky Hillane,
Eric Widman,
B,
Jude,
Monsieur Squirrel,
Fergus Evans,
Anubis a Jackal,
Kamina,
Brandon Craig,
Break the System,
Sean Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Lentil,
Clara Volume,
Amelia,
Corvina Ravenheart, the trans metal DJ from Twitch and VR chat will play St. Lucifer for props.
Tabitha Jo Cox, aka Candy,
Fiona McDonald,
Torakuso H,
Murgatroyd,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stella,
Cindergozer,
Rebecca Prentice,
Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion,
Florence Stanley,
Helen _
L. Hollingsworth,
Nick Ross,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Nick Duffy,
B. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Ted Delphos,
Vic Parsons,
Patreon user,
Melissa Brooks,
Vic Kelly,
Catherine,
Sabrina McVeigh,
Sophie Lewis,
Cassius Adair,
Karakan 12,
Adrienne Penner,
April Heller,
Ariadne Penier,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Lanos,
Lauren O'Nions,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean.
and Chris Hubley.
Thank you all for watching. Bye!
Thank you so much. Bye.